What if you could build a successful newsletter business that makes you money without growth hacks, sales funnels, or being constantly online? Dan Oshinsky is the former director of newsletters at BuzzFeed and The New Yorker. And now he's also founder of InBooks Collective. It's a one-person newsletter business helping writers, individual NGOs, organizations, publishers build smart and sustainable email strategies. Dan's newsletter has quietly grown from 0 to 10,000 subscribers, but as you hear, that is not the point. This conversation is for the introverts, the thoughtful builders, and those of you who don't want to feel salesy every time you share your work online. We talk about how to grow slowly and intentionally, why the more I give away for free, the more business comes in, how email is kind of a sneaky way to build a real business, and how Dan defines enough in a world that always pushes for more. Whether you've got 100 readers or a thriving list, I think you'll walk away from this one feeling calmer, clearer, and more confident about how you're building your own newsletter business in your own way. What I think is super interesting about you, Dan, is that you're doing your newsletter really like in your free time. This means like early in the morning or late at night, similar to me, because you have now also a kid in the house. And I love this that you are creating it in the cracks of time, sometimes on an airplane, because there are so many people who would want to start their newsletter business, but they say, Christina, I don't have the time. What do you say to someone who's coming to you and saying, I don't know, do I have the time for this? I know it is important because, we're definitely not past peak newsletter. So how or what would you say?
To me, the most important thing is that anyone who's starting a newsletter find the right cadence, the right frequency for how often they want to send. So when I first started sending a newsletter on my own for my business, this is 2019, I started once a month. Once a month is what I had time for. I had a full-time job. This was a part-time thing that I did on the side for fun. There wasn't even a business. Inbox Collective, the business I run now, did not exist. I was working at The New Yorker, a magazine in New York City. It was a thing that I did once a month. And to your point, I actually did most of the writing on airplanes. I did, my wife and I, we didn't have a kid yet. We would go on trips and I would save up a bunch of links that I wanted to write about in my newsletter, which is about newsletters. And I would do most of the writing on the plane, to be perfectly honest. And it was a thing where I knew once a month I would always have, we were kid-free in New York City and in our early 30s. And I was the kind of lifestyle where, usually once a month we're going on a trip somewhere. If there wasn't a trip, there would be a weekend morning on a Saturday or a Sunday morning before my wife woke up where I would get up earlier than her and I could spend an hour and I would do little bits of writing throughout the month and then publish. Whatever you are comfortable doing, whatever works with your lifestyle, that's great. If what you can start with is once a month, that's fantastic. If what you can do is once a week, that's fantastic. If you can do once a day, that's fantastic. It doesn't really matter to me. It's more around trying to make the newsletter work with your life. The expression that I have is, it doesn't work unless it works for you. And so you have to figure out what works with your schedule, with your life, with your level of busyness. And that's not going to be the same for every person. I think we'll probably come back to this answer a few times in this conversation, but there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to newsletters. There is no one path for monetization, one path for growth, one path for content strategy. It's all about trying to figure out what works for you and for your audience.
One more from Dan. Inside the Online Writing Club, Dan teaches a full masterclass on slow growth, invisible marketing, and building a newsletter that lasts without burning out. So join us inside the Online Writing Club. I know about your tech stack that you're using, and of course, someone could feel already like overwhelmed with this, but you're using WordPress because you now have your own website, your own custom domain. You have MailChimp, you use Google Forms, for instance, Airtable and Zapier to like connect the dots and everything. What do you think are the bare essentials you'd recommend for someone launching their newsletter today? So for instance, I'm on Substack, so I think Substack is doing like everything for me. However, I connected this now also with my own website. So what would you say are like the the bare essentials you'd recommend for launching?
You can certainly launch with a lot less than I did, but when I first started with 2019, the entire tech stack was Tiny Letter, an email service provider that no longer exists. MailChimp bought it and closed it down a few years ago, but super, super simple to publish on. And I had that, and I had a Google Doc that the actual, basically the blog post that I published every month would go to. So I would send out an email and say, the latest edition of my newsletter is here. You'd click and you'd go to my Google Doc that was public. It was possibly the least complicated tech stack in human history, in the history of newsletters. And it's gotten more sophisticated over time. You mentioned I use WordPress and I have a real website now. I am on MailChimp, not because I think MailChimp is the best email software in the world, but because a lot of my clients use MailChimp. And so I like to be on the same platform as a lot of my clients to make sure I'm up to date with all the latest technology and changes, things that they're working on. And I use a few other things that are pretty simple to keep my website going, but it's not very complicated. The great thing with a newsletter-centric business is, to your example, is a good one. You can be on a platform like Beehive or Substack or Ghost and have that be the thing that you do everything with. And that is honestly okay. You do not have to make it more complicated than it needs to be until you feel like it needs to be more complicated. For me, I got to a point with my Tiny Letter plus Google Doc format that I knew I was outgrowing it, that I knew the newsletter needed to have a real website. It needed to be something that you could find when you searched for it in Google results. Interestingly, Google Docs do not show up in Google search results. That really wasn't working for me anymore. I needed something that felt a little bit more grown up, a little bit more professional. And so I changed the tech stack as I went. But you don't have to start with something super sophisticated. Something like Substack is more than enough to start with.
What do you think about Substack right now? Because I know that you know about this whole landscape of newsletters and all the ESPs, even service providers out there. Just, short and quick, what do you think about like Substack now reaching also 5 million subscriptions and so on? Is it like a place or the place to be at the moment?
It's certainly a good option for a lot of writers in that it's free to start and they provide a lot of the basic tools that you need to launch and grow a newsletter. For a lot of newsletter writers, the big question is, do you need to be able or do you want to create a business that goes beyond paid subscriptions with your newsletter? If so, it may make sense to look at another platform that better incorporates advertising, that connects with other tools that allow you to build out memberships or launch courses or sell books or products or merchandise. Substack is really good for the writer who needs something basic to start and is thinking about selling some sort of paid subscription. If you're thinking about some other business model, it may be an option that's okay at the start, and you start to look elsewhere once you've built that audience. I have a lot of writers that I've worked with who started on a platform like Substack, and then they reached a certain level of success with their newsletter and decided, I need to go and be doing something a little bit more sophisticated. Substack is kind of bare bones, which is fine for a lot of writers because it does a really good job of what it is, which is helping you write, build, and monetize a newsletter with paid subscriptions.
And I also know that you see yourself, because you accidentally became a newsletter consultant, let's call like this. I know that you say that what you want to be is like you want to be an accountability buddy and a coach for the people you help. What are some of the like most common mindset blocks or strategic blind spots you see solo newsletter writers facing? Because most of us are solo newsletter writers. I think you are still a solo. Am I right about this? Or do you have now a bigger team?
No, it's me. I have an assistant who helps me out with a few
Yeah.
things behind the scenes, but it's purely just me.
What are like the blind spots you're seeing there?
Yeah, even if you're going solo, you still need to have people on your team, and I'll put that in the air quotes. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have full-time people or even people you're paying. That may just mean you have friends you've made in the industry or colleagues that you respect, someone you know, who you can go to and talk about the things that you're working on. So for instance, if you're a solo newsletter writer, it's really helpful to find someone else who might be an industry friend or just a writer that you really respect who might be on doing a similar sort of thing, and reach out and say, I'd love to be able to set up time every once in a while, even if it's once every 3 months, just to check in. I just want to hear how you're doing. I'd love to talk about how I'm doing. I'd love to swap ideas because everyone needs someone they can talk to about their work. I do this too with other consultants in this world. There's other people that I'll check in with sometimes once every 2 or 3 months just to say, how are things going? What are you working on? What are you struggling with? And it's helpful to have someone that you can just talk to who might understand a little bit about what you're going through, who could suggest ideas, even if they're just there to say, I've been through it too. It's hard. I still don't have the answer, but you're not alone in this. That's really helpful. It's nice to know you're not the only single person. So even if you're going through this alone, you still want to find some people who are kind of part of your team that you can talk to, that you can vent to, that you can share ideas with, that you can strategize with. That's really important because it is a very lonely world to do this sort of thing. And especially at the start, if you're putting a newsletter out into the world, maybe you have a few hundred or you have 1,000 subscribers, maybe you get a few emails back every time you send something from your audience, but often you feel like I'm writing these things and I don't know if people really like this or not. I'm not necessarily getting a lot of the feedback that's telling me if this is good or not. And so you have to find ways to create those teams and those communities that allow you to get that feedback and go, okay, I'm on the right track. Things are going well. Keep building. Or I think I need to start to make some changes. I might be missing something. Another thing I'll suggest, whenever you can, ask your audience for feedback. Ask them to reply or use features like polls if your newsletter has it. Tools like Substack and Beehive are great for that. You can certainly use things like surveys as well to try to collect feedback to make sure, hey, I'm doing this alone, but I want to know you, the community, tell me if I'm on the right track. Am I doing the right things? Am I building a newsletter that's good and useful for you?
Yeah, surveys are so important, and also like this community building so that you don't feel like a lone wolf, because you don't have to be a lone wolf. And I know that in the past people called you like the BuzzFeed Dan or the New Yorker Dan, and then over time you've like expanded your newsletter, what it is and everything. How can creators lean into their past experiences, even if they seem unrelated, to shape a newsletter and business that stands out? Because I know many start and then they say, hey, I have this corporate job, for instance, in real estate, but I want to build something else. I want to have this passion side gig. And then then in another coaching call, they come to me and they, Christina, I am this real estate agent. Maybe I should write about this. So what can you tell us about this?
It's a really good question. One of my favorite examples of this is someone I used to work with and still a friend in the industry. His name's Jason Pfeiffer, who's the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. And he has a great independent newsletter separate from his work with Entrepreneur Magazine. A great example of someone who is thinking really strategically around, I have this day job, but I also want to build my own audience because he's a speaker, he's a published author who's written books, he has big goals, long-term in his career. And that day job, Entrepreneur Magazine, may be part of his, journey over the next couple of years. But it would not surprise me if he also goes out and goes fully independent because he's been building this audience separately. I think anyone who's trying to aim for any sort of long-term goals. You mentioned earlier, I think of myself as an accidental consultant, and that's because I never really intended to do this job. I had a full-time job at the New Yorker. I was working at this magazine. It was a great job with really smart people. I didn't really plan on going anywhere, but I started to write this newsletter to serve a very specific audience, people who at the time also worked in media and did things related to newsletters. The brief story I'll tell, when I was in New York, I would have regular coffees with people who would get a job, at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, places like that. And they'd say, I'm the new newsletter editor and I've never done this job before, but I know you've been doing it for a while. Can we talk? I want to pick your brain and kind of hear about the things that you've done right and wrong so I can do a good job at this job. And they would always ask, what do you read to get smarter? And I thought, oh, you know what? I should make a newsletter where I share that sort of thing. People kept asking me the question. That was a really good sign that there was an audience out there. Now, I thought that audience was going to be pretty small. When I started this, I assumed my audience is going to be a few hundred people who work in media, probably in New York City, who have a job like mine. Great. And that would have been enough. And what happened was pretty quickly, within 6 months, I had grown my newsletter to about 1,700, 750 subscribers. It was not a huge list, but it was a big enough list that people were starting to reach out to me and say, hey, we're trying to figure out how to get, improve our email strategy. Is there someone you could recommend? And they were really asking for me, do you want to work with us? And I ended up going out and launching this business. But I started it by accident. It was by listening to people and who had these questions, identifying a clear audience and trying to write for them. Over time, the audience has expanded, and that's been a great thing for me.
Ready to grow without the hustle? Join Dan Oshinsky inside the Online Writing Club and learn how to build a healthy, sustainable newsletter business your way. Subscribe for more.
For anyone who's going out and doing this, so much of just this job is it's listening, it's trying to write for specific people, your audience. Christina, I'm sure you've had the same experience. When you start writing a newsletter like this, you have a specific type of person in mind. Maybe even it's an actual person, a friend of yours, a colleague. You say, I want to write for them and do something good for them. And then over time, as the audience expands naturally, you realize, okay, there's different sorts of people that I want to incorporate. And sometimes I remember pretty early on, there were stretches where my newsletter would get shared, say, at a conference. I remember this one week where a bunch of people who worked in communications, they sent out newsletters and emails for communications related to banks. Small banks in the US all emailed me and said, hey, I just signed up for your newsletter. I was at this conference and someone said we should sign up. And so I did. All the people from banks, and I wrote back to all of them. I said, that's really cool. I'd never expected people who work at banks who send newsletters to sign up. I want you to know I'm probably not going to write anything specifically for you because this is not I don't know anything about banks besides the fact that I have a bank account. And I can't really give you good advice other than, I hope you'll find stuff on my website that you can figure out how to take that knowledge and advice and apply it to you. But, I decided, okay, I'm never going to be the guy who writes about newsletters for banks. That's not for me. But still, I'm happy if they're on the email list. I hope they find things for me. It's about finding that audience, knowing who you're writing for, and really being smart and intentional about, okay, these are the people that I want to deliver great stuff for every single week. The more you do that, the more success you have. You'll find as you grow and build a newsletter list, you don't really know where this thing is going to take you. I, like I said, never expected to do this job. This is the 7th year that I have been running Inbox Collective. I did not expect to do this, but I'm certainly very grateful for it. And I think anyone who launches something and makes something, when you start, what you're really doing is opening that door to the possibility that you could build something bigger than yourself. And to answer your question from like 7 hours ago when I started talking, Christina, as far as the process of going in and, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's I have a full-time job, but I'm trying to do something on the side. The great thing about having a side project is you might end up creating a job for yourself that you didn't expect. I certainly did. And it was by making a little bit of space every month to start writing and then being willing to say yes to the opportunities that came along as my audience grew.
I love this anecdote with banks, and I think what I love about Inbox Collective really is that you have this on a meta level, for everyone, no matter which niche we're in, we can find their value, value on your side, and it's very in depth. So you have these in depth reports, you have success stories, and so on, and you're giving all this away for free. Something that many recommend, although many, especially new newsletter writers, say, are you sure about that? Should I really give 98% or so for free? What are you thinking about this? What are you recommending others?
The more that I give away for free, the faster my newsletter list grows. And more importantly, I've discovered the more I give away for free, typically the more business I bring in. So it's completely counterintuitive. The idea of giving things away from free for free leading to paid work makes no sense when you start to think about it. That was certainly my fear at the start. What if I give too much away? And people say, we don't really need to work with you. We have, I read the article that you wrote about how to set up a welcome series or how to convert readers into paying supporters. I don't need to work with you. The article is right there. No need to pay you for this work. Thanks for giving it to me for free. And what I've realized is when I write about topics like, for instance, how to use newsletter surveys to go out and understand your audience and make a better newsletter, what happens is people then write back to me and go, oh, this was really useful. I read your advice, but I'm still trying to figure out how to take that advice and make it apply to my organization, to my newsletter, to my business. And I'd love to talk about how we could work together to figure out how to make things work for me. Because everyone's newsletter is different. Everyone's newsletter is unique. So I find that when I put a piece of content out for free, typically that opens a few new doors. And someone goes, I liked what you wrote, and I'd love to talk about how to take these ideas and make it apply to my newsletter. So don't be afraid to give away things for free. I still think for a lot of writers, and I think I'm an exception to this, I give away more for free than most. And there is probably, actually, I'm not going to say there's probably, there is definitely a world if there was an alternate person behind Inbox Collective, a different newsletter operator running this. Someone could take very similar sorts of content, apply a different strategy, implementing a paywall, having a paid subscription or membership, and do very good things with it. I made the choice pretty early on that I wanted as much to be available for free as humanly possible, because I started to realize there were lots of writers around the world who simply could not pay at any level, no matter what the price. And I thought, I really want to build a resource for them. Inbox Collective as a business does well enough. I could make a little bit more money if I paywall some content, but I don't really feel the need to. I'm doing just fine, and I'm happy to give as much away as possible. Everyone gets to make their own choice, though. I do think it's important to have some content available for free because you want people to be able to sample your content, to see what you're good at, to understand your work. So then they can say, I really like the way you think. I like the way you talk about whatever you talk about. And I want to figure out either if it's something in my case, a consulting business, how we could work together, or for yours, I really like the way you talk about these topics, and I want to pay for access to more content or more community or more conversation around the things that you're good at.
Dan built his newsletter to 10,000 subscribers without obsessing over growth. In the Online Writing Club Masterclass, he shows you exactly how. Subscribe for more. And what I also love about you is that you say, something like the moment you start your newsletter, you also start a business, because email is actually kind of a sneaky way to talk about how to build a really successful business. The moment you, let's say, wrote 52 newsletters in a row, you definitely are in the middle of building your email newsletter business. I'm really thinking of a business because you're a solo. You want, of course, there are some who want to build their audience, but most, of course, want to monetize their newsletter. So what do you think with this link between newsletter and business, how important this is?
So not everyone starts a newsletter with the idea that they're going to build a business. Also, there are plenty of great newsletters that do not need to be their own business. Say, plenty of people launch a newsletter as a side project because, for instance, I hear this so often. People say, I just want to get into the practice of writing on a regular basis. And the newsletter is a place that I can go and practice my writing. If lots of people sign up and read it, that's great. But if it's just a few people, that's okay. It's more about publishing and committing to a schedule. That's fantastic. Some people do it for personal growth and professional growth. Some people use a newsletter as a way to get to that next job, that full-time job. That's fantastic. Sometimes, though, like in your case or mine, you end up building a business on top of your newsletter. And like you said, a newsletter is great for a lot of different reasons. One is you have that direct relationship with the reader. They get to know you. They can write back to you. It's really easy once you have an email address to pitch them on ideas. I have this course that you can pay for. I have a membership that you can pay for. I have services that you can buy from me. I have a book that I'm selling. Fantastic. We already have the way to reach them and sell that product or that offering to them. For me, the most important thing is the best newsletter-based businesses typically involve a few different revenue streams. Sometimes it's something like a paid subscription, a paid membership, a donation strategy. Sometimes it's advertising. Sometimes you're selling products like ebooks or courses. Sometimes you're selling services like a consulting business or you're teaching. Sometimes you're using your newsletter to go out and get freelance writing opportunities. There's lots of different ways that you can monetize. Oh, I forgot to mention one, events and merchandise. Those are things that are often available to newsletters. There's lots of different possibilities. Once you create that email list, you can decide where you want to invest. My advice to anyone is start with just one strategy for making money. Pick one thing that you want to start with, and every couple of months or every year, see what else you can add to it. So with my newsletter, I started with the consulting business. I had the newsletter and told people, you can come work with me. Here's what it costs. Here's what that looks like. Get in touch if you want to work with me. That was great. As I grew, I added other elements. I added advertising. Then I added an affiliate business where I recommend different products and tools, which email service provider should you use, Substack or Beehive. I have recommendations here, and if you use these links, I may get a small payment as a thank you from that company for recommending you to that tool. Great. And then I've added other things like events and speaking. So over time, there's now multiple revenue streams attached to this newsletter, this business, but I didn't start with all of it at once. I picked the one thing that I got excited about first and then added more layers over time. I think a really hard thing for a lot of newsletter operators or writers is it's so easy to look at examples and go, oh, this person over here, they launched their newsletter a year ago and look how successful it is and how big it is. If I'm not that successful within a year, my newsletter is a failure. And the answer is like, no, there are exceptions. There are people in this space who are all-stars who they launch a newsletter and 6 months later, wow, look at their success. But there's a lot of newsletters that are more of a slow build where it's, over the course of a year or 2 or 5, you see them starting to grow and build an audience and build a business. And so if you're doing something in this space, try to focus on the things that you're most excited about and be patient because there are a lot more people who have built slow, successful newsletter businesses than people who have had these rocket ship newsletters where it feels like overnight, you never heard of this person and now they're the biggest thing in the world. That's more of the exception than the rule. There's a lot more of us who are, okay, I'm 5 years in, I'm 10 years in, but I've been building this thing into something that's pretty exciting.
You've built a consulting business through this invisible marketing, let's call it like this, because you're not really like marketing your stuff. But yeah, so because many people are saying, Christina, I don't want to sound so salesy. As a newsletter writer, I don't want to like sell myself, my writing and my newsletter. What are you telling these people?
Mine is a really good example. I love the phrase invisible marketing. That's fantastic. I love that idea because it's very much what I do. If you look at my newsletter, my website, honestly, it's a little bit hard to find that I even have a consulting business.
Yeah, it was just today when I was, doing the research. I was like, oh, okay, everything is built on this consulting and I can check out everything.
It's all there, but it's a little bit hidden.
Mm.
And that's something that's worked for me because I find with my personality, I don't love to sell things. I am not a natural salesman. It's not something that comes super easily to me. And I find for me, when I subscribe to somebody's newsletter and they start immediately trying to sell me on something before they built the relationship, before I really trust them, those are the newsletters and businesses that I go, I don't know, this feels so one-sided. It feels like you immediately are trying to reach into my wallet and get my credit card. I don't know you yet. I don't know if I trust you or if I really want to listen to you. I'm still getting to know you right now. Why are you trying to sell me something? That was always kind of a turnoff for me. And so with my newsletter, I thought, okay, well, If I don't like being sold to so aggressively, why should I do that to my audience? I want to be a little bit more low key. My goal is to teach, to share, to help you learn. And I do have on my website, I have in my newsletter, little links that say, hey, if you're interested in working with me, here's how to get in touch. But you're not going to find some big pop up on my website that says, hey, are you looking for the best strategies in the world? If you pay me this amount of money, I can tell you all my secrets. Like, not something like that. For me, it works because it fits with how I like to talk and how I like to operate. I am perfectly happy if someone is a reader, and there are readers on my list who have been readers since 2019, who have never paid me a single dollar, and that's okay by me. I try to be a little bit more low key with things. And when I do have something to sell, like an ebook or a conference that I'm part of, something like that, then I'll send an email. I'll tell people about it. I'll mention it a few times. I'll talk about it on LinkedIn, but I try to keep things a little bit more low key because I personally don't love that feeling of trying to sell and sell and sell. Now, in terms of making money for the business, I would make a lot more money for Inbox Collective if I was more aggressive in promoting my services, my business, the events that I'm part of. It just doesn't fit with how I think about the world. And so I do a little bit less, but I think it's okay to do a little bit less. Something that I'm going to steal from, I did an interview with him about a year ago, a guy named David C. Baker, who's written a number of books about expertise that are great that you should check out. And something that he told me that I love is because he does a very similar thing. And to actually why he told me he wanted to chat with me for an interview. It's like, I like how you do things. I do a very similar sort of thing where I don't really push people that hard on my services. What I try to do is I try to be useful. I try to share what I've learned. So if someone does come to me and say, hey, David, I want to work with you, they already know how I think. They know what I'm interested in because they've been reading me for a while. And then that sales process of trying to get someone to become a client is pretty easy. They've already pretty much decided that they want to work with me. It's more about me deciding if I want to work with them. And that's kind of how I treat things too with Inbox Collective.
Slow growth is real growth. If you love this interview, Dan's full masterclass inside the Online Writing Club goes even deeper. Come learn how to grow quietly and confidently. Join 12,500 writers inside the Online Writing Club. Weekly live masterclasses, Q&A sessions, access to coaching, and community-driven bootcamps, all built for solo newsletter writers like you. So subscribe and see us inside. Yeah, somehow on Substack, you get like pushed to add the subscribe buttons, for instance. This is also something that I'm now like rethinking. And then, of course, always if you then go with the paywall, then of course they're hitting the paywall and then they get your ding, ding, ding. These are the reasons why Christina's newsletter is awesome, something like this. However, I love this approach with invisible marketing, being like a branded marketer myself, especially if you're an introverted writer. You don't like it to be so salesy, and that's why I think it's awesome. And again, if we would approach this invisible marketing more, and then at somewhere on our newsletter side, people would then find an offer from us. If we don't have the time to offer one-to-ones, because many don't have the time for this, they might have just like an hour or two. And if we're giving it then to the coaching calls with one-on-one, for many it might be better to give it to one-to-many or so. What would you recommend for those who say, I can't offer a one-to-one? Again, I'm an introvert, or I want to give it to more. What would be something that we could offer them then?
Well, the great thing about newsletters is there's so many opportunities. Maybe the thing that you start with is something simple like an ebook or a webinar where people can join and learn from you. Maybe what you want to start with is something super simple like a classified section within your newsletter. Someone can buy, a little advertisement, 50 words at the bottom of your newsletter with a link out to their product. You don't need to sell everything at once. And a business like mine is a good example of this. I started with a lot of small clients who said, we'd love to work with you. They reached out and I thought, this seems kind of interesting and a little bit scary to do this sort of work. I've never done anything like this before. Yeah, let's do it. Let's try. And then it built the business slowly over time and expanded the types of work that I do. But just like with, like I said earlier, when you start a newsletter, start with the time that you have for the audience that you are most interested in reaching. The same thing is true for any sort of paid product. Okay, if I have a little bit of time, maybe it's something simple like an ebook that I can sell for a few dollars or a few euro. That's totally fine. Maybe what I'm doing is a webinar that people can join. Maybe I have a paid subscription, but I don't overpromise. I don't tell people you're going to get a million things every month from me. You're going to join this community and I'm going to write one thing that's going to be behind a paywall per month. Okay, that could be a good start. Start with what you're comfortable with, what you think that, if you have something that you think you can share that people can learn from, or you have ideas that you think are worth sharing that you think people will pay for, that's great. Package it however makes sense for you. Try to make it work with your time, your schedule, your life. And it's okay if the first thing that you make doesn't make a ton of money. I went back and was looking at this the other day. The very, very first client that I got, they asked me to come and to do a little bit of an audit of their strategy. And I had no idea what to charge. I charged them $1,000. $1,000 someone paid me to go through and look at all their emails and make recommendations. And I put together these slides and gave a presentation. I was so excited. I'd never sold anything before. 1,000, beside from having like a lemonade stand as a kid where people could pay 25 cents per cup of, lemonade. Never sold anything in my life. $1,000. This was amazing. This is so great. And now I look back and I go, wow, it was small and it was simple. And I've been lucky that I've done work. I can charge more than this now. It's become my full-time business. But I started with something small. I made up a number at the time that I thought was big. Now I laugh at that. I charged $1,000. I put so much work into that. Someone was willing to pay me literally more than $1 US for this sort of thing. I have something to share that apparently is valuable. It's my job to figure out how to package this knowledge and expertise to be valuable, what to charge. I had to learn more to get smarter and figure out how I could sell my services for more. But just knowing that I could do something, that someone would be willing to pay something for me, gave me the confidence to go, I bet there's probably more that I could do. I bet I could continue to build on this and grow. And I have certainly grown this into a much larger business, but it starts with that first step, with that first sale, with that first client. Everyone has to start somewhere.
Want to build your newsletter and your confidence and writing muscle? The Online Writing Club gives you the tools, guidance, and community to make it happen. Join more than 12,000 writers today and subscribe. You said that opportunities really showed up on your doorstep. And for many new writers, they might now listen and say, oh, not for me, I don't have this momentum going. I'm talking into the void. How can someone who's just starting plant not the same, but seeds that then would grow into something as word of mouth, people recommending, or even generating leads so that someone would then say, hey, I would love to do a coaching call with you, or I would love to buy an ebook or something?
It's just a matter of getting out there, starting to write and continuing to write, making a commitment to publish at whatever cadence you think makes sense, daily, weekly, monthly, and be friendly with people in the industry. One of my favorite things is when people write back to my newsletter. I think a lot of folks believe a newsletter writer of any size, whether you have 100 readers or a million readers, everyone believes that everyone's too busy to reply. But you would be surprised. Folks like me, I write back to every single person who writes back to my newsletter. And so I don't always write back, within 10 minutes like I used to. Sometimes it takes a day or two, but I always write back. And some of the best friendships and relationships I built in this industry are from people who took the time to write back and say, hey, Dan, I like that thing you wrote. That was really, really cool. And just every once in a while, they, start a little pen pal kind of relationship. They write back, I write back to them. And a good example of this, a couple years ago, a writer, she wrote back to me a few times about things that I had wrote about. She asked me some questions. I shared some advice. We stayed in touch. I started working with a new client of mine, a notable writer here in the US who's written some bestseller books, who's had a lot of success. And she said, I live in Austin, Texas, and I really want an assistant to help me out, or a writing kind of person, someone who understands newsletters. And I thought, oh, I actually know someone who lives in Austin, Texas, who you should meet. And it was this person who I had communicated with. I never met in person, but we communicated a bunch over email. And so just that little seed of her writing back to me led to me making an introduction because I knew her, I'd read her work, I liked it. And the opportunity came along and I thought, oh, I can make an introduction here. And now these two writers have been working together for a few months now. It's going incredibly well. Made me so happy that I can make this introduction. But it was all because this person took the time to write back to me in the first place. And you never know when something small like that, publishing every week, publishing every month, taking the time to write back to an author you like, you never know where that might lead. Like I said earlier, these little actions often open the door to something bigger, to bigger possibilities, to bigger opportunities. Give yourself the chance by putting yourself out there. And sometimes, if you do good work, you meet the right people, you get lucky, a door opens that you didn't expect.
You're saying, I'm not really in this for growing my business beyond where it is at this point. So I think you now are at 12,000 subscribers or 11,000 or 10,000 subscribers at
What?
this point.
It's probably somewhere in that range, but to be honest, I don't really pay attention to it anymore because it doesn't really matter to me. I think it's somewhere like 11 or 12,000, but I don't really care.
And how did you come to define like enough in your business? And what would you say to others who feel like pressure to scale just because they can, or see, for instance, on Substack the leaderboards, or others, who say, "Hey, I gained 10 paid subscribers, or I got, I don't know, 50 people in my courses, or whatever." I really love it because many can't define enough, and then they want to grow, grow, grow faster, faster, faster. And maybe how important are subscribers for you? Are subscribers really so important, or is it more like then the conversion or the business you can make in the background?
So I think it was 1,750 subscribers when I left the New Yorker and started in my business, Inbox Collective. That was the moment. I was about 6 months into launching my newsletter back in 2019. And that was the moment where on a monthly basis, I was getting emails from different businesses, different news organizations in particular saying, we have this budget. We're trying to find someone to work with us. Could we work with you? And I remember telling my wife, this is really interesting. They're asking for the chance to work with me. The question is, do I want to say yes? And at the moment where I was getting regular inquiries, can we work with you? That was really where I stopped caring about the size of my email list because I knew I had enough people at the start that I could actually have some clients and start to build a business. And as long as, my newsletter list grows slowly and steadily, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about growth, even though it's funny, I advise a lot of teams about how to grow their newsletter quickly and work with several very fast growing newsletters. I don't really worry about it for my particular audience because what I find is over time, the right people tend to find my newsletter. A lot of them go, where has this been? I've been looking for something like this for a long, long time. I'm so glad I found you. I don't really worry about whether my newsletter adds 100 people or 1,000 people in a month because I know that I have built a strategy that allows me to slowly and steadily build a good business, one that works for me. And that's all that really matters. For another writer, it might be different. You may say, I have to grow quickly in order to monetize the way that I want. And that's okay too. But I think I'm a decent example that a slow growing newsletter can be a pretty successful newsletter as well. And I'll say a final thought, which is you got to pick the metrics that matter to you. For me, I care a lot about whether, one, I can build a business that's successful year over year. And so the revenue for the business is important. But the most important metric for me when I put out an article, I look at whether people spend time on my website reading that article. And if they do, then I know I've done a good job that week. And if they don't, if I see an article that I published, people spend a minute on it, I go, oh no. Usually a good article, 3 or 4 minutes of read time is pretty normal. So I know the metrics that I'm looking for. I try to focus on those. Growth, to be honest, isn't really one of them. That's okay. It doesn't have to be for everybody's.
Dan, everyone who was listening and watching this right now and fall in love with you, where can this person find you and reach out to you?
Sure. You can find all of my writing and work at inboxcollective.com. And the only social media platform that I spend any time on is LinkedIn. You can certainly follow me there. And if you do, by the way, just say hi. Tell me you found me through the podcast. I accept every LinkedIn request that comes with a little note that says, hey, here's how I know who you are. Otherwise, I don't know. And so please just attach a little note. Would love to connect and say hi.
Cool. Then thank you so much. It was delightful.
Thanks for having me on.
Like this interview? See ya in the next video.